Welcome to today's video, everybody. We're diving deep today into some news that happened on Maduro's birthday, the president of Venezuela. The White House basically announced that they're considering a psychological operation, which is a leaflet dropping operation. And again, this kind of thing has been done since World War I all the way through World War II. All the different wars, there's been leaflets and psychological operations. But I'm going to tell you why I think this is actually the best operation of them all, and likely no leaflet needs to fly. I mean, it could. They definitely could be flying. Some people on X have been calling it President Trump's birthday card to a President Maduro of Venezuela. His birthday was the 23rd of November, so that was the running joke, was all these leaflets are going to come down. But I want to dive in now to X. I want to talk a little bit about kind of what that psychological operation might be, what aircraft would be doing it, and how it would actually be executed. There's actually precedents of fighter jets dropping leaflets in Iraq. The F-15E Strike Eagle, you could pack, a big bundle of leaflets on the speed brake behind the F-15E, and then it opens up as you fly over the territory you want to drop the different leaflets. Just don't hit that speed brake switch early, okay? You know the young wingmen's out there thinking, don't touch the speed brake, don't touch the speed brake. I mean, I would. That's what would be going through my mind, even as an experienced flight lead. But let's go ahead and just jump right into it, guys. Here we go. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit before we get to the PSYOP within the PSYOP, okay? And that's what's going on here as we see on X. So again, the feminists of Canada, they're saying the U.S. is at war with Venezuela. There was a time when such a thing would attract some criticism. Deadly airstrikes and a military buildup, how the U.S. pressure campaign against Venezuela has unfolded in the Caribbean. So again, the PSYOP right now, and there's polls coming out saying, 3 out of 4 Americans reject the war. They don't want a war with Venezuela. And here's the thing, guys. So there is a PSYOP being countered from Venezuela, right? So there's the PSYOP from Venezuela basically trying to tell the U.S., hey, do not take Maduro out of power, because Maduro's in charge of a lot of those hackers, a lot of those hacker farms. But here's the thing. So myself, having served in the global war on terror, all right? So I flew in Afghanistan, I flew 70 combat missions. I saw how ridiculous that situation was. I mean, there was basically little military bases at the bottom of canyons with a 360-degree fighting position around the base. So yeah, you tell me if that's a smart. I mean, you don't have to go to a military academy to know that that's not smart. But again, basically lots of rhetoric coming out, basically saying, Marco Rubio, the president, they're all trying to start a war with Venezuela. But here's the thing that is being pumped in people's brains. A traditional, conventional conflict like we saw in Afghanistan and Iraq, that to me does not look like what is on the playbook for Trump, Rubio, Hegseth. As a military person myself, having operated the strategic wishes of higher headquarters, I can see, here's what I see. This does not look like a conventional operation. So 3/4 of Americans are opposing a conventional operation, and that's not what's being said. So again, I oppose a conventional operation as well. That would just be stupid. But in this day and age now, with this psychological operation ability, you can make the public think that it's going to be another Afghanistan, another Iraq. Something else I've been seeing a lot of is another Vietnam. That's what's been being pumped out a lot as well. And again, so Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, mentioned that the U.S. government will be looking to announce that the Cartel de los Soles, which is controlled by Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, that's basically affirmed, is now going to be a foreign terrorist organization. So again, that means that there's new tools and techniques to be used against the terrorists, not a conventional boots on the ground. Like, no offense, if you were in the army, we don't want a young private out there interacting with any population, that you're not at extreme war with, because you want that person to just blindly follow orders. But in counterinsurgency operations, what would be going on in Venezuela, the conventional option would be completely a disaster. And what I see from this administration, from the Trump administration, is they agree with that. And you've got people like Tulsi in there that have seen the implications of the GWOT, the global war on terror. To me, there's no chance that there'll be a conventional conflict. But here's what I do think is going on. A very surgical, well thought out conflict and a PSYOP on both sides. So the PSYOP from Venezuela is no GWOT, no similar outcome as Afghanistan and Iraq. But the Trump administration's smart. Pete Hegseth's smart. He saw the global war on terror. Basically, they're not going to do that. They're going to be very surgical, and that's what we've seen with the boat strikes. The surgical ability of the boat strikes to actually take out thousands of pounds of fentanyl with one strike, no U.S. lives lost, no boots on the ground, is just, to me, it's a very sneaky operation. That is how you fight when you're fighting up against a sneaky enemy, right? If the enemy is sneaky. They're using PSYOPs to say, let our boats come through, let the drugs come through, because we want to keep making money. This is what Maduro's regime is basically saying. Then you're going to try to convince the population of the U.S. that these boat strikes are going to lead to boots on the ground, 100,000 privates from the army, infantrymen, boots on the ground. No one wants that. That's a ridiculous operation. But here's what is happening now. If you look at the precedents, okay, so let me refresh this and see if anything new is coming in. I love talking about this like PSYOP on both sides, because the PSYOP's coming in from both places. So here, let's see what's being said. Yep. So U.S. military near Venezuela. Okay, Brazil's coming in on it. Brazil's basically going to, everybody's going to kind of there's probably connections to Maduro from a lot of these presidents down there. They all have lunches together. They're all on each other's Christmas cards list. We don't want to see Nicolás gone because Nicolás gives us, X, Y, or Z trade. We don't want to see that gone. So that's an option that we could see, happening with some of these presidents. I don't know. I need to look more into that one, to be fair. I don't want to oust the Brazilian president if he's actually, aware of the evil, drug trafficking that's going on with the Cartel de los Soles. And then let's see. So got some discussions going on. Basically, I wish I could read Spanish. I'm not even going to try. So here we go. A raid in San Antonio, November 16th, detained over 150 people, mostly undocumented immigrants from Venezuela and other countries, per DHS. Claims of 148 being U.S. citizens lack support. So again, they're trying to say that they were U.S. citizens, but they're Venezuelan citizens. So does Maduro actually have sleeper cells in the U.S.? I mean, there's a potential for that to be the case. But again, when it comes down to these operations, it's on both sides. And the surgical ability of the U.S. to go out and strike these boats and then do PSYOPs within Venezuela. That's what's very interesting. And that's something that I kind of want to just hit at a little bit. So the PSYOPs, the psychological operation, this is a U.S. Army website. It talks about becoming a master of influence. Psychological operations, PSYOP soldiers use expert communication skills and unconventional tactics to support U.S. Army objectives. So this is super rad. I think this is awesome. But again, it comes down to that war of influence. Myself, having been on the Thunderbirds, it's a PR team, a public relations team, and the war is on social media now a lot of times, right? This is why all these countries have these hackers like Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela. They have massive amounts of hackers trying to go out and sway public opinion, right? So if they can convince the US population that this is going to be another Vietnam, then there'll be less support for the boat strikes and there'll be less support for a regime change. But here's also what I want to talk about with the regime change thing. So if you see the strategy that's being done with the regime change, there's a $50 million wanted poster for Maduro. Actually, I'm going to pull that up right now. We got to see that. So, I mean, this is the best regime change operation, in my opinion, if you're thinking of it from a strategic perspective, because it's not an ouster of troops going in. It's basically getting the people around Maduro nervous and maybe wanting to cash in on this $50 million bounty. So let me pull that up. Just a cool 50 mil. So that one's when it was 15. So there it is when it's 50. I mean, poor guy. He's got a $50 million bounty. There we go. $50 million. So again, this is the type of PSYOP and regime change that's being done, in my opinion. So it looks like they're trying to make Maduro's inner circle nervous. They're trying to say, hey, the top lieutenants of Maduro, this guy's going away at some point, because $50 million bounty in a country that's full of cartels and thugs, at some point, someone's going to cash in on this. So again, you don't have to do a traditional regime change where people are thinking of rolling in with tanks through Caracas. Like, no, you just let it happen within itself. You let it kind of dissolve within itself, and then you let the population come in and actually have a legitimate vote on who takes power. So again, the PSYOP is not what you're being told. You're being PSYOPed by Venezuela if you think that this would be some sort of an Iraq, Afghanistan type thing. This is Maduro basically saying, let's get the population of the U.S. on my side, so they think this is another Afghanistan, and that'll be our PSYOP against the U.S. population. So, and against the Department of War, against the Trump administration, against Pete Hegseth, and all that. So, again, I like to call out and call a spade because we got to know what's being pumped into our brains, especially when it's coming from a dictator in Venezuela who's got complete control and runs, thousands of tons of narcotics a year and probably has gold AK-47s and 50 mistresses. All right, so here's the Leaflet campaign. So again, seeing all this go out, this is basically going to start to sway a local population. And again, this is coming out of, it looks like a C-130. So those were plans that were actually talked about in the White House. So basically this is low risk, high drama in a way, but you got to get the C-130s into theater. So you got to get the C-130s into a position where they're not being shot down. So that could be why the RC-135 spy plane was on the coast of Venezuela, trying to basically get the information, get the electronic intelligence, the signals intelligence to see what kind of weapons were in the area. So, this would be a freaking cool mission to be on as long as all the surface-to-air missiles, the S-300s, were taken out. So again, being a strategic thinker and skilled communicator, this is kind of what I'm trying to bring to you guys today. This is getting hardcore. I'm going to need a little sip of coffee here. Okay, so this is why I made my channel, honestly, because I want you to be a strategic thinker and a skilled communicator. I don't want you to be susceptible to PSYOPs. So if we know more about PSYOPs, we can kind of bring things back to common sense, okay? So this says a PSYOP soldier supports Army missions by using intelligence. So that's coming in from signals intelligence, like those RC-135 spy planes. Could be coming from EA-18G growlers, scooping up and hoovering up all that information. Interpersonal skills. So again, thinking through, all right, what is the inner circle of Maduro doing and what are they trying to do to us? What are they trying to put onto us? Because when you just think of things like kids on a playground, like, high schoolers out, trying to like wrestle for who's most popular, like a lot of that plays out, guys, on a way higher level. I mean, look at Congress. You go to Congress, it's going to be the cool kids, the popular kids, and the and the non-popular kids. That's how it works. That's human nature. So interpersonal skills. What's going on in this guy's personal life? That's something I like to think of. And again, Maduro's being pressured. That regime is being pressured. He's got the drug cartel connection, so he's getting pressured from that side as well because those people, offing a president, you think that that's going to be hard for them? Nah, they don't care. So again, interpersonal skills, what's going on in the life of these dictators, what's going on in the lives of the people in our country, how are those interpersonal skills playing into the broader sense? Cultural sensitivity, so how are things different? So national pride in Venezuela, relatively big. And also they've been under the thumb of Maduro for a few years now. So they've been basically pressured and pushed into not having a backbone. Okay, so cultural sensitivity is like they're like, we just finally adapted to this dictator, and now things are being shaken up again. So that's going to be hard for that population as well. Foreign language proficiency. So when you look at the RC-135, you got 30 intel operators in the back of that beast. Thing is a total beast. So you got the operators back there making sure that they're hoovering up and sucking in all that information. So again, that's a super capable platform up there, understanding everything that's being said in Venezuela, even if they're speaking Russian. Hint, hint. 120 Russian advisors that are there. I'm sure there's some Venezuelan peeps that speak some Russian as well. And foreign language proficiency to affect the actions and opinions of foreign individuals, groups, and governments. So again, this kind of lays out this PSYOP and how these leaflets could fly if they do fly. But I'm going to tell you even a better idea here in a second. I'm going to give it to you for breaking news. It's already been thought of in the White House, but I want to talk to you about it as well. So then it goes on to say, serving as an expert in human connection. So PSYOP soldiers work in small teams to execute missions around the world. They build relationships with leaders and civilians to gain trust and influence. They also use social media, digital marketing, and pamphlets to share information meant to help shift beliefs and behaviors in the U.S. Army's interests. So there you go. Pamphlets, digital marketing, flyers, all these things that are potentially going to fly out of the C-130. This one's like, happy birthday, Maduro. Maduro, you're done. Maduro, your regime is over. I mean, there's going to be so many different strategic communications that could come out and go towards Maduro that, it's just interesting to think about. So you're going to influence with information. That's a big part of all this. Intentionally deceive. So again, this is right in front of us. This is how a PSYOP happens. Military deception means using psychological warfare to deliberately mislead enemy forces during a combat situation. All right, there you go. So, but this could also mean swaying the population towards a legitimate government. So there's basically, you can do your own research, but it looks like Maduro's election was completely deceived and there was actually a true victory that happened there. So you could basically just put that back into the minds of people. So that's not deceiving, but it's intentionally deceiving Maduro. So again, this could be a big part of what goes down, what we see here in the next few days. Advising governments. Yep. So obviously having governments that support capitalism, that's something that the U.S. tends to do, supports business. We got to call a spade a spade. Venezuela has a lot of oil. So a lot of U.S. oil companies would love to come in and be advisors. So are they receptive to that? Rescue efforts. So again, communication and rescue efforts is huge. Persuade, change, and influence. And then it goes into the PSYOP selection process. Very interesting. But again, man, I want to dive more into okay, what's the twist here? So no boots on the ground. I firmly believe that there'll be no boots on the ground, maybe besides some CIA and eventually some top tier 1 units that are going to be potentially going in. So to me, that's very surgical. That's what Afghanistan should have been. That's what Iraq should have been. So no bombs, no boots, potentially for now. Bombs maybe later down the road. But these psychological jabs, they're meant to crack Maduro's loyalty machine. So again, if you think of everybody around Maduro, it's all propped up and based on that loyalty. So it's an avenue to avoid escalation. And then there's critics that are basically, calling it a CIA rerun that could backfire. And again, there's always the chance of that. But if the local population has enough of a backbone to stand up against Maduro, now the U.S. doesn't have to do anything. And I think that's kind of what the U.S. at this point, our strategic goals when it comes to warfare, is way more based on the U.S. not putting boots on the ground. If you look at the conflict in Iran, right, we definitely could have rolled in, done a total regime change. But what I think happened personally is that they assessed that the local population in Iran, which has basically been stomped out of having any backbone, was not able to take control of the country, and that the military, the top military brass, would just fall back in line to the next radical cleric. So if they got rid of the Ayatollah Khamenei, then the next one would just step up, and it's so ingrained right now in that population that it would take boots on the ground to do a regime change. So I think that's why there wasn't a regime change there, is because the U.S. was like, we're not willing to risk having to put boots on the ground. And that's the strategy of this new administration. And I think that's the exact same thing they're thinking about when it comes to Venezuela is there going to be the chance of having to have boots on the ground here? Because we're not willing to do that. But what we are willing to do are surgical strikes, kind of like what we saw in Iran, that those massive weapons, 30,000-pound bombs, going in. But also potentially special operations, top tier 1 units, CIA operations. So everybody that's pumping all this stuff on X about needing the approval of Congress to declare war. Yeah, I agree. If it's going to be boots on the ground, if we're going to have army privates on the ground, we got to declare war through Congress. But surgical operations, surgical strikes. I mean, could you imagine for that strike in Iran, if you needed Congress's approval, you got to wait 6 months? And then by then Iran has a nuclear weapon? No, that's not how it works. So again, strategic, surgical, that's what I see as the benefit here. And I think that's what the operation would be as well. But again, social media is the battlefield, obviously. So right now I was looking on X, hashtag Maduro's birthday PSYOP is trending. That's awesome. But again, here's something that's very interesting. So I think there were airlines that were canceled over the last few days, right? Multiple airlines canceled. So they're basically squeezing the regime in Venezuela to feel like they're isolated. So the Russian oil tanker turned around. Now the airlines are being squeezed out. So the airliners aren't allowed to fly in there anymore. And now we've got this potential for a PSYOP to happen with leaflets being dropped. But here's the thing. Venezuela's population being accessible to X, being able to see what's going on, they don't even need to drop a leaflet at all. Do you guys see what I'm saying? So there doesn't need to even be a leaflet that's dropped, because just by getting this story out there, just by the White House pushing this story, it's digital leaflets. So basically there's digital leaflets, hundreds of thousands of digital leaflets all throughout Venezuela. So the population is being told, look, this dude's, basically a part of the cartels. You all know it. I mean, they all know it. They just can't really speak up against it because they're under the thumb, right? So they'll get killed. And then, oh, by the way, this guy has a $50 million bounty on his head. So don't mind that little $50 million bounty. And then the inner circle is going to start squeezing in on Maduro. So I just think that this operation has the chance to be a very effective psychological operation. And let's see if there's anything breaking right now that I can share with you guys before we end. Love bringing you guys these breaking updates. Let's see. Yeah, they're saying, so EU delivers a message, no war on Venezuela. I agree. No massive boots on the ground war. Absolutely not. But, for Europe, if you were getting, tons of fentanyl and fentanyl precursors and cocaine and other things shipped into your country illegally, well, I don't know. Europe doesn't really have a backbone right now. So maybe that's a bad analogy. So here we go. Mike Robinson says, these guys have the goods. I don't even know what he's talking about. I just like that picture of the F-35. Yep. Of course, the Progressive International condemns the strongest terms military escalation against Venezuela. Yeah. Well, hopefully Venezuela stops shipping drugs and Maduro can not be connected to Cartel de los Soles. So again, PSYOPs going on X, PSYOPs going on from the White House. It's all coming down. And it all comes down to this moment, guys, of how does this escalate? Where do we go from here? And I'm just excited to be on this ride with you guys. Keep you updated. Quick coffee break before we end it. Let me know if you guys like these breaking news stories. I'm really enjoying doing these. It's a little different than the normal ones I do, but I love bringing you guys this breaking news. And it kind of keeps a video coming to you every single day, maybe multiple per day, which I enjoy. Keeps my finger on the pulse as well. If you guys would, just go ahead and follow me on X, follow me on Instagram so we can continue the conversation, and watch these videos that pop up right here. That helps the channel grow exponentially, and I would greatly appreciate it. So I will keep bringing you this news as it develops. I'll be bringing you other news from other parts of the world as well. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you have a great day. This is Ryan, also known as Max Afterburner, signing off.